Now it's my pleasure to welcome online Quan Jin.
Hi, everyone. It's a great honor to speak at Black Hat USA 2022. Today, I will share some experience and insights on in the wild Windows LPE 0day hunting. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Quan Jin. You can also call me Lucas. I'm currently employed in DBA security. My interests are vulnerability research and in the wild zero-day hunting. Previously, I had presented at Blue Hat Shanghai 2019 and HITB 2021 Amsterdam. Okay, let's get to the point. This is the agenda of my talk. Let me first explain why we decided to hunt in the wild Windows LPE 0day and why we think this is possible. As you can see in the picture, from 2017 to 2021, Microsoft disclosed a total of 28 in the wild Windows LPE 0 days. Most of them are Windows kernel vulnerabilities. These vulnerabilities are often used by top-level groups and could cause great harm. For security vendors, it is very challenging to catch such a 0 day. Starting in 2020, we began to think about the possibility of catching in the wild Windows LPE 0 day. So, is it possible to catch in the wild Windows LPE 0 day? In order to answer this question, we should think about other two questions. Number one, how to obtain valuable data sets that potentially have 0 days. Number two, how to develop an effective detection method. For the first question, we have some private data sets. In addition, historical cases show that public platforms such as VirusTotal may have 0 days. Therefore, by using private and public data sets, we can solve the first question. For the second question, there are two methods of catching a 0 day from millions of samples. Dynamic detection or static detection. Dynamic detection refers to execution in a sandbox or in a real environment and picking up a sample through abnormal behaviors, such as antivirus and Sandbox. Static detection refers to match samples with static signatures, such as Yara. And burst methods have advantages and disadvantages. We have tried burst methods within our capabilities. Based on the result, we think the static detection is most suitable for us. We will detail the process later. Next, I'll explain why we spend a lot of time studying historical in the wild Windows LPE 0 days. So why should we learn from history? There are three reasons. Number one, some exploit techniques are consistent over time. Number two, think from the attacker's view allows us for better defense. And number three, historical cases have been carefully studied by the community. In order to learn from history, we've studied over 50 CVEs, almost all in the wild Windows LPE 0 days, and some 1 days that's from 2014 to 2021. We carefully counted the discovered vendor, using organization, patch cycle, initial disclosure article, usage scenario, targeted system versions, vulnerability model, vulnerability type, exploit techniques, public analyze blocks, public exploits, the original sample, if have, and some other information. Here, I would like to focus on a few key points. The first point is usage scenario. Whether the sample was used as a standalone component or as part of a chain, and whether the exploit was used in a fileless form or was just contained in a job file. This information will directly affect our selection of different detection methods. The next point is targeted system versions. Many Windows LPE samples will check OS version before they are used and can only trigger or explode in some specific versions. This information is useful when making a sandbox or a reproduction environment. And next is vulnerability model. By counting the vulnerability models of historical samples, we can conclude which component is most targeted and which attack surface is most favored by attackers during a specific of time. And this information is useful when we predicting the most likely vulnerability. Let's say vulnerability type. By counting the type of historical vulnerability, we can infer which type of vulnerability is the attacker's most favored. This information can help us configure reproduction environment. For example, whether need to configure driver verify. And this information can also show the popularity of different vulnerability types. Next point is exploit techniques. I think this is the most important information. We count the exploit techniques for most in the wild Windows LPE 0day from 2014 to 2021. Based on the statistic, we have obtained some valuable conclusions. For example, B server-side window proc method was popular from 2015 to 2016, and the method of using previous mode to achieve arbitrary address read and write has become more and more popular since 2018. And we also found that the method of using edge and validate handler to leak kernel information is popular in the past 5 years. The next point is public analyzed blocks and exploits. The public blocks and exploits contain the research results of the whole community. Absorbing this existing knowledge is just like standing on the shoulders of giants, which is very helpful for us. And finally, the original sample is hype. We also pay great attention to collecting the original samples of each historical Windows LPE 0day. The files, hash, and exploits of these original samples are the first-hand information. If we can detect them, we can also catch similar samples in the future. In addition to learn from history, we should also learn from the latest vulnerabilities and exploit techniques. The reasons are as follows. Number one, a new disclosed vulnerability may have variants. Number two, a new targeted model will be fast and odied by the whole community. Number three, an attacker may have some similar vulnerability in use or wait to use. Number four, a new exploit techniques tend to be used by attackers soon. Next, I will describe how we compare different detection methods and choose one from them. As far as we know, there are 3 optional methods to catch in the wild Windows LPE. Antivirus, or something like it. Sandbox, or something like it. Yara, or something like it. Antivirus is the most powerful tool. Experts have caught some in the wild Windows LPE 0day with their antivirus in the past few years. The advantages of antivirus is that it was deployed in large-scale real-world environments. It can also detect threats in real time and have chance to extract encrypted privilege escalation component. However, not every vendor's antivirus can be as good as Kaspersky. Also, antivirus is likely to be bypassed or detected. This increases the difficulty of developing an antiviral-based hunting method. Sandbox is another tool to hunt in the wild 0day. I had some successful experience in the wild office 0day hunting with the help of Sandbox. Interested audience can refer to my previous speech on Blue Hat Shanghai 2019. Unlike antivirus, the Sandbox environment is highly controllable and can be freely configured. In addition, The Sandbox behavior-based detection makes it accurate. However, I think Sandbox is somehow not suitable for hunting Windows LPE 0day. Unlike Office, many LPE exploits have OS version check to avoid unexpected BSOD, which makes them more hidden to Sandbox. You may think that we can solve this problem by making a few more environments, but the number of new PE samples every day is huge. Each sample is delivered to a new environment means a huge resource overhead. Not every vendor has enough money to afford this. In addition, Sandbox-based detection methods have other disadvantages for Windows LPE samples. Number one, some samples require paraments, but the Sandbox cannot provide valid paraments by default. Number two, some samples only lead to BSOD without subsequent behaviors, which is difficult to detect it. Number three, there is a cycle between Sandbox development and deployment, which will lead to missing the best detection cycle for some latest exploits. Yara is another method to hunt in the wild Windows LPE 0day. It is widely used for malware hunting. Yara almost has no technical barriers, no fears of various checks, and it is flexible in development and deployment. When a new exploit technique appears, we can quickly convert it into rules and feed it into the detection system. Finally, it is lower cost than Antivirus and Sandbox, but it also has some shortcomings, such as it can easily lead to false positives and false negatives. Therefore, if we use Yara to hunt in the wild Windows LPE 0day, we need to be very familiar with historical cases, and we have done this before. In above, we have compared three hunting methods. We finally choose Yara as our main hunting method because it is more easy, more flexible, and less expensive for Windows LPE 0day hunting. Another reason we choose Yara is that after writing some Yara rules, we back-tested some historical Windows LPE samples. To our surprise, Yara performed better than expected. Next, I will describe how to transfer learned experience into Yara rules. Basically, we have three principles. The first principle is write rules according to the signatures of each stage of exploitation. Normally, a Windows kernel LPE exploit has the following stages: vulnerability triggering, heap function, kernel information leak, arbitrary address read and write, control flow hijacking, privilege escalation. Our task is to write rules based on the common features of each stage. Here are two examples. For kernel information leak, the idea is to match against common Windows kernel information leak techniques, including but not limited to this. And for arbitrary address read and write primitives, the idea is to match against the following points. And it should be noted that the above address some possible ideas. Not all ideas are suitable for Yara rules, and some ideas will lead to lots of false positives. The second principle, write rules for latest exploit techniques. Here I give two examples. In July 2020, Paul Filiero and Coinbase of Synactive presented a new Windows heap overflow exploit technique at the SSTIC 2020 conference. After studying their paper, we realized that the method of arbitrary address read with the help of pipe attribute in PagePol is universal and may be used in the future. So we spent some time writing some Yara rules for this technique. It later turned out that these rules caused some high-value samples. And on June 8, 2021, the Spurs guy wrote a blog which disclosed an in the wild Windows LPE 0day. As mentioned in the article, the sample achieved arbitrary address read and write with the help of Windows Notification Facility, aka WNF. In July and August 2021, Alex Plaskett of NCC Group published 2 blogs detailing the exploit techniques of CVE 2021-31956 and explaining the method of using WNF to construct arbitrary address read and write primitives. At the same time, Yan Zishuang also wrote a blog discussing the method of exploiting vulnerability with the help of WNF. After studying these blogs, we realized that the method is universal. We again spent some time writing some Java rules for this technique. As expected, we did catch some high-value samples. The third principle is write rules for the most likely vulnerability. I also give an example here. On April 13, 2021, Spursky wrote a blog and disclosed CVE 2021-28310, which is an in the wild 0day in desktop window manager. Less than a month later, ZDI published another blog disclosing another vulnerability, CVE 2021-26900, which is also a vulnerability in desktop Windows Manager. This made us realize that this type of vulnerability may appear again in the future. So we wrote some rules for desktop Windows Manager vulnerabilities in hours. A few weeks later, we called CVE 2021-33739. Build the right rule is the first step. In order to catch an in the wild Windows LPE 0day, we need to build a whole system. But here are some questions. The first question is, when an exploit is matched by a rule, how to notify us in time? If our Java rules running on VirusTotal, we can use the notification mechanism on VirusTotal hunting page. We can configure the notify by email item. When a new sample is matched, our email will receive a notification at once. For rules running on our own products, we built a similar notification interface like VT. And the second question is, when we get an exploit, how to quickly reproduce it and classify it. We have counted the targeted OS version for each historical sample by studying historical cases. This information can be used here. In addition, considering that what we hunt may be an day, 1 day, or 0 day, we need to make all 3 types of environments, and we need to update these environments over time. In order to minimize the reproduction time, we have made multiple versions of Windows. The third question is, what skills should we master to debug different Windows LPE exploits? Let me give an example here. For those who have analyzed the Windows kernel heap overflow vulnerability, Windows kernel debugging and driver verify are 2 basic skills. Besides, for those who have analyzed DWM core vulnerability, it is necessary to using Windows remote debugging, because directly attaching the DWM process will cause system UI to become unresponsive. The more experience we have, the better we'll answer this question. No method is perfect. To make our system more accurate, we have made the following tests and improvements. Number 1, use the collected history Windows LPE 0day samples to test the rules. Number 2, use public POCs and exploits to test the rules. Number 3, for some case where the public POCs and exploits cannot be collected, try to write the POCs and exploits and test them. Number 4, apply the rules to a large number of samples for stress testing. And number 5, continue to convert latest exploit techniques into rules and test the rules. 1 year after the system was deployed, we had caught lots of Windows LPE vulnerabilities. In next part, we will share 3 cases which harmed by our system. And in the wild LPE 0day in Windows 132 kernel subsystem, and in the wild LPE 0day in Windows Desktop Window Manager, and in the wild LPE 1day in Windows Command Log File System. Let's take a look at the first vulnerability. In December 10, 2020, we caught the first in the wild Windows kernel LPE 0day. Microsoft signed CVE 2021-1732 to this vulnerability. The inner wild sample was from our private dataset. We noticed it because it used edge and validate handler to leak kernel information, which is a strong signature of Windows kernel LPE exploit. Further analysis showed that the sample exploited a type confusion 0day in 132 kernel model. It is worth mentioning that the in the wild sample was used as an independent component. When using the sample, you need to provide a PID as a parameter. The PID indicates the process which needs to be activated. The targeted process will be terminated first, then restarted with system privileges. If you run this sample directly, it will also escalate itself into system privilege, but it will exist without any visible behavior. Here are some highlights of this in the wild sample. Number 1, it targeted the latest version of Windows 10 operating system at that time. Number 2, it used getMenu_bar_info to build arbitrary address read primitive, which is novel at that time. Number 3, before exploit, the in the wild sample detected specific antivirus and performed system version check. The rest of the details about this 0day can refer to our blog or many other blogs written by the whole community. Now, let's switch to the second vulnerability. In May 22, 2021, we caught the second in the wild Windows LPE 0day. Microsoft signed CVE 2021-33739 to this vulnerability. As I mentioned in the build the right rule part, we will regularly predict the most likely vulnerability and write rules. Around May 2020, we wrote some rules for DWM vulnerability. After catching some DWM days, we caught an unfamiliar DWM sample on May 22. Further analysis shows that there were a 1-day exploit at another 0day in this sample. When we first met this sample, we didn't know it was compiled based on published exploit code. As usual, we reproduced it in a full-patched environment. The reproduced results clearly showed that there is a 0day in this sample, which is a UAF in DWM code. Then we tracked this relative source code on GitHub, which is an exploit of CVE 2021-26868. The in the wild sample just replaced the shellcode part. At that time, we are a little confused. How can a 1-day sample contains a 0day? After carefully confirmation, we conclude that the author accidentally introduced a new bug when writing the exploit for CVE 2021-26868, and the author knew this. If so, this 0day cannot be classified to in the wild 0day. So we try to tell MSRC that this is not strictly an in the wild 0day. And this is the exploit status finally published by MSRC. So it's really an interesting case. Let me talk about this vulnerability more. This vulnerability is caused by unbalanced reference count on C interaction tracker binding manager object in DWM code. The steps to trigger this vulnerability are Number 1, create a state interaction tracker bindings manager module resource. Number 2, create a state interaction tracker module resource. Number 3, bind the resource created by step 1 twice to resource created by step 2, as you can see in the picture. And do not release this resource manually. On the normal condition, the state interaction tracker binding manager will call process state tracker binding mode twice to add reference count by 2. Then the code will call remove tracker bindings twice to sub reference count by 2 and release the state interaction tracker binding manager normally when the reference count is reduced to 0. In a vulnerability research scenario, the reference count of the interaction tracker binding manager will change differently from normal condition. It will call process state tracker binding mode only once to add reference count by 2. However, the code will still call remove tracker bindings twice to sub reference count by 2. In the first remove tracker bindings call, the reference count over the interaction tracker binding manager will be reduced to 0. Then the say interaction tracker binding manager will be freed in internal release function. In the second remove tracker bindings call, when it tries to get some data from the freed object, it will call UAF. Next, let's see the third vulnerability. In October 2021, we caught a new in the wild Windows common log file system one day. The sample was from VirusTotal. As I mentioned in the build the right rule part, we will regularly write rules for latest exploit techniques. On October 16, 2021, the rule we wrote for the pipe attribute hit a sample. The sample was used as a standalone component. Further testing revealed that this sample exploited a vulnerability which affected all supported Windows versions before September 2021. This is a type confusion vulnerability in common log file system model. Due to lack of some information, we are unable to determine the CVE number of this vulnerability. It may be one of them or none of them. The root cause of this one day is the CLFS model lacks some checks on the client context offset. An attacker can take advantage of this to provide an invalid client context offset. The in the wild sample leverage this to make the first client context offset point to the second container context offset in a BLF file. It then uses a 1-bit flip in flash metadata to change the second container context offset from 1380 to 1B80. It flips 3 to B, makes the container context offset point to a fake CLFS container object. With the help of the fake CLFS container object, the exploit hijacked two virtual methods, CLFS container release and CLFS container remove, and built an arbitrary address read primitive based on that. The normal virtual function table of CLFS container is as follows. You can see the release and remove function. And the hijacked virtual function table is as follows. Apart from this, the in the wild sample built an arbitrary address read primitive using the pipe attribute method described in the scoop Windows 10 Pro. In order to get the address of a pipe attribute, the exploit using another public method, it queries system big po information to leak the address of a pipe attribute object. With the kernel arbitrary address read and write primitives, the exploit successfully swapped the token of current process with the system token and spanned a share with system privilege. Now, let's take a look at how Microsoft fixed this vulnerability. They only checked the value of client context offset to make sure that it couldn't be less than 1368. What if we construct a client context offset that is greater than this value and make the client context offset point directly to a CLFS container object in memory? We got a new BSOD. This is a variant of this patched 1day, and we report this variant to MSRC at December 2021. Microsoft fixed this case in April 2022 and assigned CVE 2022-24480 to it. Okay, that's the vulnerability case sharing part. In next section, we will combine our practice to share some detection suggestions on Windows LPE vulnerabilities and give some insights into the future trend of in the wild Windows LPE 0day. Here are some detection suggestions on Windows LPE vulnerabilities. Number 1, choose the most suitable method within your compatibility. Number 2, carefully study historical cases. It's always a good thing. Number 3, keep an eye out for new variants of a new in the wild vulnerability. And finally, some insights into the future trends of in the wild Windows LPE 0day by us. Number 1, more vulnerability in common log file system may appear in the future. Number 2, pipe attribute method will be using again in the future. Number 3, in the wild exploits which use the following techniques may appear in the future. And finally, thanks to these guys, I have learned a lot from them. And thank you for attending my session.